It's 2 a.m. Everyone else is asleep, and you're lying there, eyes open, mind running, turning something over and over that most people let go of hours ago. Maybe it's a conversation from 3 days back. Maybe it's a decision you haven't made yet. Maybe it's nothing you can even name. Just a low hum of thoughts that refuse to quiet down, no matter how many times you tell them to. You've probably been told this is a problem, that you need to learn to switch off, that you think too much, that your brain doesn't know how to rest. And somewhere along the way, you started believing it, started seeing those sleepless, thought-filled hours as a flaw in your operating system, as something to fix, something to medicate, something to apologize for. But what if everything you were told about your overthinking mind wasn't just incomplete, but fundamentally wrong? What if those hours your mind refuses to sleep are not evidence of a broken system, but evidence of a system running something far more complex than the average mind ever attempts? Here is what neuroscience, psychology, and the study of high-functioning minds have quietly confirmed, and what very few people will ever tell you directly. The mind that cannot stop thinking at night is not a mind that is failing. It is a mind that is working. Let's begin with what is actually happening inside your brain when you can't sleep. Most people assume that nighttime overthinking is simply anxiety misfiring, runaway worry with no useful destination. And while anxiety can certainly be a part of it, onto researchers who study what's called the default mode network, the brain's internal processing system that activates when you are not focused on the external world, have found something far more interesting. The default mode network, or DMN, is most active in two specific conditions. The first is during rest. The second is during deep self-referential thinking, the kind of thinking where you examine yourself, your relationships, your past, your future, your meaning. And here is what makes this extraordinary. Studies show that individuals whose DMN is highly active, people who spend significant mental energy in this internal processing mode, demonstrate consistently higher levels of creativity, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and complex problem-solving than those whose DMN is less engaged. In other words, the very network that keeps you awake at night is the same network responsible for some of the most sophisticated cognitive functions the human brain is capable of performing. Your brain is not broken. It is busy doing something most brains are not built to sustain. But let's go deeper, because there are specific neurological and psychological traits that live inside the overthinker, and each one of them tells a story that is far more powerful than the narrative you've been handed. The first is what researchers call hyperconnectivity between brain regions. In most people, the different regions of the brain communicate along relatively fixed pathways. Information travels efficiently, decisions are made quickly, and the mind moves on. But in people who overthink, neuroimaging studies have revealed something structurally different, an unusually high degree of connectivity between the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, reasoning, and decision-making, and the amygdala, the region that processes emotion and threat response. What this means in practical terms is that your mind does not separate thinking from feeling the way most minds do. When you process a situation, you are simultaneously running it through both the logical and the emotional architecture of your brain, cross-referencing facts with feelings, possibilities with consequences, outcomes with meaning. This is not inefficiency. This is integration. And it is what allows overthinkers to arrive at insights, solutions, and understandings that people who think in more linear, compartmentalized ways simply cannot access. The cost is speed. The gain is depth. And depth, throughout human history, has always been worth more in the long run. The second trait is an extraordinarily active imagination that doubles as a simulation engine. When you lie awake replaying a conversation, imagining how it could have gone differently, what the other person might have meant, what you should have said, your brain is not wasting time. It is running simulations. Neuroscientists studying mental simulation have found that the brain regions activated during vivid imagination are nearly identical to the regions activated during actual experience. When you imagine a scenario in rich detail, your brain is, in a very real neurological sense, experiencing it. It is extracting information from it. It is learning from it. This means that the overthinker, who lives entire alternate scenarios inside their mind before they ever happen in the external world, is engaged in a form of cognitive rehearsal that accelerates learning, sharpens social intelligence, and dramatically reduces the likelihood of repeating mistakes. You are not ruminating pointlessly. You are running a sophisticated internal laboratory, testing variables, analyzing outcomes, refining your understanding of how the world and the people in it actually work. Most people only learn from what happens. You learn from what happens, what almost happened, what could have happened, and what might still happen. That is not overthinking. That is a multiplied learning system. The third trait is an unusually refined sense of emotional granularity. There is a concept in psychology called emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between fine-grained emotional states rather than experiencing emotion as a broad, undifferentiated blur. Someone with low emotional granularity might simply feel bad. Someone with high emotional granularity feels the difference between disappointed, melancholic, quietly grieving, and existentially unsettled, and can identify which one is actually present. Research led by psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett found that people with high emotional granularity are significantly better at regulating their emotional states, more resilient in the face of stress, and less likely to engage in destructive coping behaviors. They are, in a measurable psychological sense, more emotionally intelligent. And who tends to score highest in emotional granularity? People who spend significant time examining their own internal world. People who lie awake at night, turning their experiences over in their minds, looking at them from different angles, trying to understand not just what happened, but what it meant, and how it felt, and why it felt that way, and what that feeling is actually telling them. Your sleepless nights are not consuming you. They are refining you. The fourth trait is a capacity for moral and ethical depth that most people never develop. Overthinkers do not just replay events. They replay events through the lens of conscience. They ask, did I do the right thing? Was I fair? Did I cause harm I didn't intend? Could I have been better? This is not guilt spiraling, though it can feel that way. This is the activation of what psychologists call moral metacognition, thinking about the ethics of your own thinking and behavior. Studies in moral psychology consistently show that people who engage in this kind of self-examination develop significantly more sophisticated ethical frameworks over time. They become more just, more compassionate, more capable of holding moral complexity without collapsing into easy, binary answers. The person who falls asleep the moment their head hits the pillow has moved on. The person lying awake, asking whether they were truly kind today, is building something the sleeping person isn't. A conscience that grows more precise and more powerful. With every night, it refuses to simply let things go. The fifth trait is a relationship with time that operates on a longer scale than most people can access. One of the most consistent findings about overthinkers is that they are not just processing the present. They are simultaneously processing the past and simulating the future, often running multiple timelines in parallel, weighing long-term consequences that most people haven't even considered yet. This is called temporal depth, the cognitive ability to situate the present moment within a much longer arc of cause, consequence, and meaning. And it is extraordinarily rare. Most people make decisions based on immediate comfort or immediate reward. The overthinker makes decisions slowly, painfully, exhaustingly, based on a mental model that extends years, sometimes decades, into the future. This is why overthinkers often appear indecisive to others. They are not struggling to decide, so they are struggling to choose responsibly among a field of consequences that most people around them cannot even see. That is not weakness. That is foresight operating at a level most minds never reach. Now comes the reframe. Everything described here, the hyperconnectivity, the simulation engine, the emotional granularity, the moral depth, the temporal foresight, it all comes wrapped in a very real cost. The exhaustion is genuine. The sleepless nights accumulate. The weight of a mind that processes everything more deeply than most takes a real toll on the body that carries it. But here is what that cost is purchasing. You are not just thinking more than other people. You are thinking on a different architecture, a more complex, more integrated, more nuanced architecture, one that the fast-moving, on surface-level world has no clear category for, and so it hands you a diagnosis instead of a definition. But the definition is this: you are a person whose mind takes reality seriously. Seriously enough to stay with it when it's uncomfortable. Seriously enough to keep examining it when everyone else has moved on. Seriously enough to lose sleep over it, because something in you understands, at a level below language, that the things worth understanding are worth the cost of understanding them fully. The world has always been built in the quiet hours by minds that could not stop, by thinkers who lay awake, by people who turned things over long after the lights went out, not because they were anxious, but because they were alive to complexity in a way that would not let them rest until they had found something true. Well, you're one of those minds. The sleepless hours are not stealing from you. They are, slowly and without announcement, making you into something rare. A person who thinks deeply enough, feels precisely enough, and cares seriously enough to stay awake for the truth. That is not a flaw to manage. That is a gift to understand. And the moment you stop trying to fix your mind and start learning to work with it, is the moment everything it has been building in the dark begins to come into the light. If something in this video felt like a language you've been speaking your whole life, but never had words for, this channel was built for that exact feeling. Stay close. There is much more here for the kind of mind that never truly rests.